Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all yet again for another evening of quality virtual Masonic education. This episode marks our 14th education in this series, which is called 21st Century Conversations on Freemasonry. Brothers and friends, as we all know, to be a brother within our Masonic fraternity is a privilege. It is an honor. So let us be mindful to utilize the tools provided to us in our education this evening to help us better understand ourselves and to achieve further light in Masonry. For those of you who are returning visitors to our education, we thank you for coming back. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we welcome you and we thank you for being with us this evening. First, I would like to go through and recognize the Masonic sponsors and participating brothers who always help to make sure that these virtual education presentations can be possible. First, I want to thank the Rubicon Masonic Society, a group of great men, a private group of Master Masons located in Lexington, Kentucky. Secondly, I want to thank the Ware Lodge of Research, chartered in 1965 and is Kentucky's oldest research lodge. And lastly, I want to thank Lexington Lodge No. chartered in 1788. It is the oldest Masonic lodge in Kentucky. Alongside my good friends and dear brothers, Worshipful Brother Dan Kimball, past master of the William O. Ware Lodge of Research, recorder of Rubicon, Worshipful Brother Tom Nitsky, current master of William O. Ware Lodge of Research, and member of Rubicon, Worshipful Brother John Bizak, past master of Lexington Lodge No. 1 and vice chairman of Rubicon. My name is Brian Evans. I am the past master of Lexington Lodge No. 1 and chairman of Rubicon, and I'm humbled to be with you again this evening. Let us proceed. Worshipful Brother Tom, would you please do the honors of delivering an open devotion?
Brethren, if you will join me in prayer. Grand Architect of the universe, remind us as we begin our meeting today of the purpose of Freemasonry. Show us that the Fellowcraft degree teaches us the importance of learning, knowledge, and education. That we must be about the business of spreading Masonic knowledge that our fraternity, being better informed, may better reflect the best that is in Freemasonry. Guide us in this endeavor as we conduct all our business this day. We ask for your name's sake. Amen.
So mote be. Thank you, brother. Brothers and friends, as you know, if you've been with us in the past, the purpose of these meetings are not only to bring us together, but to assist in the improvement of oneself by establishing a deeper understanding of Freemasonry, its traditions and practices, its tools, and further cementing the brotherhood of our fraternity for the betterment of mankind. Any opinions expressed during this virtual education will be those of the presenter or participant. They do not necessarily reflect the views of any lodge or Grand Lodge or the Rubicon Masonic Society. A full disclosure can be seen at rubiconmasonicsociety.com/disclaimer. Brothers, as you know, these are not tiled meetings. Masons and non-Masons are welcome to attend and are encouraged to attend and participate. So please be mindful that anything discussed this evening should be suitable for Masons of all degrees as well as non-Masons. Gentlemanly manners are to be expected at all times. We ask no alcohol, no smoking, no food, or foul language. There will be no discussion of politics or religion at any time, as these are divisive topics. Attendees may be removed if not following protocol. And in an effort to best ensure that this virtual education meeting is as an enjoyable experience for everyone as possible, we recommend the following. We recommend that each evening you dress in coat and tie. Please type your name and any appropriate Masonic title or location under your video to identify yourself to others here this evening. If you're not a Mason, no problem. Simply type guest after your name so we're aware. Please enable your video camera so other attendees can see you. Please reduce any background noise and keep your microphone muted when not speaking. Please turn off all of the other computer programs. Try to eliminate outside distractions. And finally, please be patient should any technical difficulties occur. Brothers and friends, tonight's guest speaker is Worshipful Brother Chuck Dunning. If you were with us last meeting, then you know that Worshipful Brother Dunning was scheduled to present last month, however, was unable to due to unforeseen circumstances. Fortunately, everyone is okay. And thanks to our very own Rubicon brother, Worshipful Brother John Sissel, who is over-prepared for his education presentation, which was supposed to be this month. He was able to step in for us last month with an excellent presentation on groupthink and Freemasonry. Worshipful Brother Sissel, thank you. Tonight, we are thankful and grateful that Worshipful Brother Dunning is able to join us and share his knowledge and wisdom on contemplative masonry. Worshipful Brother Bizak, would you please do the honors of introducing our special guest?
Yes, I will, brother. Thank you. Chuck Dunning's been a Master Mason since 1988. He's a member of Blue Lodges in the Scottish Rite Valleys in both Texas and Oklahoma. He holds a master's degree in counselor education and a bachelor's degree in psychology from both the University of North Texas. Chuck is an advocate, a facilitator, a trainer, and a consultant in contemplative practice with more than 30 years in the professional field of higher education and mental health, as well as Freemasonry. He's also the author of Contemplative Lodge, a manual for Masons doing inner work together, and Contemplative Masonry, basic applications of mindfulness, meditation, and imagery for the craft. He's also a contributing editor in the Art and Science of Initiation. He's founding superintendent of the Academy of Reflection, which is a chartered organization for the Scottish Rite Masons wanting to integrate contemplative practices in their Masonic experience. And he's also co-founder and trainer and facilitator for the Masonic Legacy Society, which freely introduces the inner work of Masonry through online documents and facilitated activities and training. Brother Dunning, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Brother Bizak. And I want to thank Brother Evans and all of you, Brother Kimball, certainly for the invitation to speak with you. Once again, another invitation that you extended to me. I do apologize for the problems that arose last time. I've got those taken care of, I believe. If anything should happen here along the way, then maybe it's the great architect trying to tell us something. But I wanted to talk with you tonight to give you a kind of the story of how my interests in Masonry developed, what they led to, and how they influenced my view of Masonry, what it is, what it can be, how it may be falling short for some of our brothers in some ways, and taking that into consideration with a view for the future. So I'm going to share my screen here with you. Okay, you should see my title slide there. Can someone confirm that for me?
Yes, sir. You're all set. Thank you.
All right. So one of the things that I want to emphasize here is this title. Contemplative Masonry or Contemplative Masonry, you may hear me pronounce it either way. And in some jurisdictions, it's actually expected that it's pronounced one way or the other. So you may hear me moving back and forth. But Contemplative Masonry is something that I think our ritual speaks directly to. In a sense, to me, Masonry is contemplative in a very real sense. And I'll be sharing more with you about that. And that word sharing is important because I came into the fraternity looking for something, and that something is what I have made a career out of sharing now within Masonry. So when I was a young man, I grew up basically in a Masonic family. My father was a Mason. My grandfather was a Mason. Most of the leaders in my church were Masons. And, this was what you see on the screen here is what my experience of Masons were largely. They were good old boys who liked to get together and play some dominoes. And, there's a nice picture of the Last Supper there in the background, indicating that they had a spiritual life that somehow connected with all of that for them. But which was mysterious to me, and I didn't really understand it. But what I saw on the surface was what I knew of them. Good men, friendly men, men that it was easy to have a good time with. My father had these books on his shelf, books like these, particularly these three. And he wouldn't talk with me much about Masonry, but he welcomed me to read anything I wanted to. I mean, he was old school. You didn't talk about it, but if it was written, then it was okay for someone else to read about it. And that's what I did. I started reading these books when I was still in my single-digit years, obviously too young to have any real grasp of what I was reading, but The pictures in some of the books, like in the Manual of the Lodge and the pictures in Clausen's commentaries, stirred my imagination. Pictures in Morals and Dogma did too, although there are relatively fewer of them. But what I could read of Morals and Dogma just convinced me that there was something really deep and significant about Freemasonry long before I could have even articulated it the way that I just did in those simple terms. I was just awed by everything that I saw at that younger age. And I continued to go back to these through my life until I reached my teens, I would say. And I think, like most people in their teens, I kind of lost interest in those sorts of things as my interests turned more toward girls and things happening at school and activities like that. And so didn't give much thought to some of those other things in life. And then when I was in college, I met this man. This is John Miller III, PhD. He was one of my philosophy professors. And John was an amazing human being. He got my attention immediately. I was at a point in my life when I was struggling for meaning. I was actually looking for a lot of the things that I had been reading about all those years ago in those Masonic books, but had kind of forgotten about Masonry to some extent. I mean, it was still on my radar, but I didn't see that as where I needed to turn. And John really impressed me because he was this really deep intellectual man, but he also had a great heart. And he was also the kind of guy that he could just relate to you on an ordinary level, just man to man. He wasn't always overwhelming you with his intellect, and he was just fun to be with. And yet, like I said, this great mind and this great heart within this, perfectly relatable man. And so I decided that I really wanted to have a kind of mentoring relationship with John. And I wound up taking most of the courses in my minor in philosophy with him. And one of those courses was called the Ancient Wisdom Traditions. And this course was all about the esoteric traditions of wisdom, particularly in the West, although we did touch on some of the Eastern traditions, but particularly those in the West. And I was fascinated, was captivated by what he was teaching, and the rich ancient traditions that he was exposing us to in that course. And one of the things that we had to do was a term project for this course, in which we picked something specific. In that course, we did some study, some reading about it, and maybe even went out and interviewed people or did some research. And then we came back and did a presentation before the class, an oral presentation as well as a written presentation to the class about what we had found. And I was kind of torn. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do Freemasonry or Rosicrucianism, because the thing that I had focused on that I really wanted to investigate was this idea of an initiatic experience and a tradition that supported men receiving the initiatic experience and going through the process of transformation to fulfill all of the greatest potentials that the human soul is capable of fulfilling. So I went to John and I talked to him about that. I said, John, at the time I didn't call him John, Dr. Miller, I have this quandary. I know what I want to generally do it about, but I don't know whether I should focus it within the Freemason tradition or within Rosicrucian tradition. And the first question he asked me was, well, do you have any kind of a family connection with either of those traditions? And I said, yes, I absolutely do with Masonry. I said, I don't know for sure if there's any connection with Rosicrucianism in any way or not. And just as we were having that conversation, at that point in the conversation, I looked over John's head at the bookcases behind him in his office, and directly above his head, was the spine of morals and dogma. And I said, not only do I have a family connection, I grew up reading that book right there. And I pointed over his head. He turned around and looked up to it, pulled it down, handed it to me, and said, "Here's your term project." So he really helped me clarify my direction there. And so I dove in. And as I was studying with John, one of the things that I had learned from him was that there was this thing called contemplation. And through the exposure to all of these different spiritual and philosophical traditions, I had learned the importance of contemplation. And you can see here some of the great religious and philosophical figures and what they have said about the importance of contemplation or meditation, which is a form of contemplation. And I had begun to study not only what contemplation is, but how to do it with John. He offered a non-credit seminar that we students could come to, and he taught different kinds of contemplative practices. This went on for several weeks throughout the semester, and then we could repeat that and go back each semester to get even more in depth. And after forming an individual relationship with him on that, then I began to be personally mentored by him in those practices. So I began to find that this was important because it addressed this Pythagorean principle of know thyself. It's attributed to Pythagoras sometimes. We know for sure that it was inscribed at the forecourt of the Temple of Delphi in ancient Greece. Socrates also talked about this axiom. And this is something that I had learned about the value of contemplation, and that was what initiatic experiences were supposed to be about, helping you to know yourself and to unfold yourself and to heal yourself in some ways, make yourself a more fitting instrument in the hand of God. So I got to work studying some books, and there you can see me at a young age with my cat. And that particular book that you see me reading there is Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages. I was looking at every source I could find about all of these esoteric traditions and about Freemasonry in particular, and began to accumulate more of a library. And here are some of the books that I started accumulating as I was doing this study for this term project. And one of the things that I found is that the word contemplation started showing up a lot in these books, meditation sometimes even, but particularly the word contemplation definitely showed up. One of the things you don't see in this stack of books is a couple of the Masonic ritual exposés that I found along the way that also clearly showed that the word contemplative or contemplative and contemplation were actually used in Masonic ritual. This got my attention. It convinced me that I was on the right track. And in fact, the more I look, well, yeah, there is Duncan's ritual right in front of you. I did provide you a picture of that. So Duncan's ritual, and reading that ritual and being assured by a number of different sources that that was pretty close to the actual ritual that was practiced in most lodges in Texas, for example, that even further assured me that the ritual really was about the kind of initiatic process that I believed that it was about and that I was hungry for. I found this in the Texas Monitor of the Lodge. This is actually a quote from Albert Pike, but it is in the introduction to the Texas Monitor of the Lodge still to this day. It's been in for a very long time, but it's still part of the introductory material in that monitor. So you can see how easy it would be for me to get the impression that Masonry is this initiatic, illuminative school, mystery school. And so, you know, I took Masonry seriously. I took the ritual at its word, and I had this beautiful view about what Masonry was about. And I learned that even Albert Mackey talked about the word contemplation in his dictionary. He talked about how that word comes from ancient Rome. And the word templum, meaning to mark off an area or a space, was used by the ancient seers called augurs of Rome. They would go mark off a space in the heavens to watch for inspiration as they were meditating on some great question, looking for things to happen in the heavens to give them a clue: comets, meteors, the movements of planets, and so on, practicing astrology. But the idea was they were contemplating, con meaning with in Latin, and templum meaning the marked off space. They were sitting in attention of this marked off space, this space marked off for sacred purposes. And that's how the word contemplation came into our vocabulary. Albert Mackey said it. Albert Pike was talking about the importance of meditation. So you can just imagine how I was thinking and feeling about Masonry as I continued to dig and continued to learn more. There are further quotes. Just look at these that I found. I'm sure every one of you are familiar with similar quotes from your own jurisdiction's ritual. Hard to come to any other conclusion if you're an outsider looking in. It's hard to come to any other conclusion than that the rituals of Masonry are designed to be truly spiritually and philosophically initiatic. So there I was, feeling like I had kind of pierced through the veil and was getting a look at what Masonry was really about after all these years, after having had this initial exposure to Masonry that just was kind of like, well, it's a bunch of guys playing dominoes, but there's a little something else going on there, and I'm not sure what it is. And it seems to be pretty profound and far out there. And then finally learning more about what the profundities were, feeling like, okay, now I know what I want and where to go to get it. But there was still this. There they were. And I thought, my goodness, how cunning they are. This is the way they present themselves, but this must be what's going on inside their lodges. This is why they're so secretive, because my goodness, if everybody knew that this is who they were, just think how odd they would be to the rest of society. Or maybe they're kind of like this. You know, maybe they're even further out there, and that's why they dare not say to anybody who they really are and what they're really about. Which, of course, at my young age only made it even more attractive to me. Hogwarts, nobody had ever even written anything about Hogwarts. It wasn't even in anybody's imagination yet back then. But this certainly captures the kind of atmosphere that I was now imagining that Freemasonry was creating inside of its lodges. So there I was, filled with hopes and expectations, eager, knocking, seeking, asking, reaching for the light of Masonry. I submitted my petition. I was accepted as a candidate, was brought in and brought to light. And what do you think I found after being brought to light? This. They were still the same guys. All the things that I had thought that I was going to find based upon my studies and my reading and my contemplation, actually, of Masonry, it wasn't there. The words were there, but the engagement with the meaning of those words, it just wasn't happening in the way that I expected it. Now, that's a significant thing. It wasn't happening in the way that I expected it. It doesn't mean it wasn't happening. So I submitted myself to the reality of what was happening in the lodge. I recognized that we're doing fellowship, we're doing good works in the community, we are engaging with each other in truth, relief, and brotherly love. In some ways, wisdom, strength, and beauty are all present and being engaged with. But that contemplative side, that deep meditative side of engaging in those mystery traditions, I really wanted that part of it too. And then I had the good fortune, through an odd turn of events, I was introduced to a man who, oh, by the way, that was what I submitted myself to, was to get involved in those things, which all of us Masons know. This is pretty typical Masonic activity, all of these things that you see here. Nothing wrong with any of these, but again, there was that part that was kind of missing for me.
So to clarify real quick for the profane.
Yes.
So you're telling me that our meetings are not comparable to the Hogwarts picture that you showed?
I would say that most of our meetings are not. Occasionally, you'll find a Masonic lodge that is closer to Hogwarts than what I experienced back in 1988. That's a great question. Okay. So these are all good things. They're all important things. Fundraisers, fellowship, good meals, practicing that ritual, that beautiful ritual that we perform, and paying bills and making contributions to charity, and also expressing our reverence for deity and our love for our country. Those are all good things. And I'm glad to be part of that, and was glad then. But again, there was that extra little something I was looking for. And through this odd turn of events, I found myself connected with a man who was actually working an initiatic path, had worked an initiatic path, and was capable of helping me understand and experience Masonry in that way. So what you see here with Mickey, that's the way I felt. At last, I was the sorcerer's apprentice. And I was ready now to plumb the depths of the great mysteries of existence, and to do it kind of within this Masonic context. I was just thrilled. And he did teach me a lot. He and my first teacher together, I still was in contact with my first teacher, but my first teacher wasn't immersed in initiatic tradition. He was a great philosopher. He was a great contemplative, but he himself was not immersed in an initiatic tradition. And then I found a teacher who was, and so the two of them were just wonderful teachers, both of them for me. And along the way, I realized I needed to connect with others. I needed to find other Masons who shared my interests. It was important for me to be doing that work on my own, of deeply meditating upon the symbols of Masonry, deeply contemplating their significance in my life, practicing the virtues, and reflecting on what that practice was like, what it demanded of me, how I could refine myself as a human being. But I needed other Masons who could relate to me in that particular search. And so that was 1988 that I got initiated. And some of you will recognize this piece of technology that I have on the screen here from firsthand experience. It's not just something that you've either seen in pictures or a museum somewhere. In 1989, America Online was the very first of the internet service providers to go up and provide what were called bulletin boards, discussion groups, all kinds of things like that. And among those, they had some groups for Masons. So there you see, I'm just emphasizing how long ago that was, but also not so long ago in lots of ways. And I was lucky. If I hadn't had the internet, I would have continued to struggle and feel like an outsider in Masonry, because in a lot of ways I was really different from almost all of the other men, and certainly the older men that I admired so much and respected so much. I really felt different from them. And that's one of the reasons why I needed to make that connection. And if it hadn't been for the internet, I don't know that I would be where I am today in my Masonic career. I would still be a Mason, but I don't know that I would have been as inspired to continue to pursue things in Masonry the way that I did. Well, in that pursuit, one of the things that happened is in conversing with other Masons who shared my interests and were doing the kind of inner work, and by that I mean contemplative work, work with virtues and so on, they were doing the same kind of work that I was doing and had the same kind of interests. They kind of prompted me, you should put together some of your ideas, because we were sharing ideas with each other about contemplative practices and how different kinds of contemplations could be a natural fit for different stages of the Masonic journey. And they encouraged me to kind of put this together in a manual. And so I did. I finally did this in the year 2000 was the first version. And this was an anonymous manuscript that I put together, and it was made available as a PDF on mastermason.com. Then we revised it a little bit in 2002, but it still remained anonymous. And we formed a small Yahoo group then, so that we could discuss with each other what our experiences were like as we worked through this manual. And for a long time, that's where things sat. I just continued to have this kind of secret life as a Mason with other Masons. I mean, a lot of my close Masonic friends, even if they weren't interested in this stuff, knew that this was my interest and that this was what I was involved in, but I didn't rub it in other people's faces. I didn't try to force it on other people. I did give some talks and presentations occasionally, but for the most part, it was really pursued on the side with these other Masons from around the country and even the world, some other countries who had these similar interests. But then in that group, that very first discussion group that I was a part of, I connected with these two wonderful brothers, the illustrious brother Bob Davis and illustrious brother Jim Tresner, may he rest in peace. Both of these brothers happened to be highly involved central figures for the Scottish Rite in Guthrie, Oklahoma, which was 3.5 hours from my home. That may sound like a long distance, but if you have ever had the privilege of meeting either of these brothers and forming a relationship with them, then you would know that driving 3.5 hours to spend a weekend with them in a Masonic environment would be more than worth it. And so that's what happened. They invited me to start coming to Guthrie because they recognized that that was a place where my interests would be welcome and nurtured and supported. And I developed a really deep friendship with both of these men, and both of them have also served as mentors to me in their own ways. So I went to Guthrie, started going to each Guthrie reunion in the Scottish Rite, and over the years was invited now to begin to help them with their educational efforts. They had an opportunity to kind of get a feel for me and how I was in a fraternal environment and what I had to offer. And so they welcomed me to actually start being part of their educational efforts there. And this is that great temple that I would go to twice a year for their wonderful reunions. The spring reunion at which all 29 degrees of the Scottish Rite are presented, and the fall reunion in which the emphasis is on education, where they would actually have more like actual class time for education for both candidates and returning members. But back then it was especially candidates. One evening I was driving up, pulling up to those steps. I was going to get out of my car and unload my luggage to go into the temple apartments and stay there for the weekend for the reunion. And I got out of my car and Bob Davis greeted me with a handshake, and he said, "Congratulations, you're now the director of education." And I didn't even know that any such title existed or was planned to exist or anything like that. But he voluntold me that I would be the director of education, with the expectation that I put together a committee and bring some real structure to the educational efforts that we had there in Guthrie. By that time, I had finished my work in college. I had a degree in counselor education, which meant that I had learned something not only about counseling, but about education and how to teach. And so I was able to bring some education and expertise to that role. That in time led to the Academy of Reflection, because one of the things that happened as a result of my educational efforts, I would include optional meditation sessions or other contemplative practices for brothers who were involved in Masonic education in the Valley. And they wanted more and more, so that eventually the meditation sessions became their own thing. And then after that, the brothers that were going through this experience started saying, "Hey, we think there needs to be some real institutional support for this kind of experience in Masonry. Why don't we see if we can create an organization and get a charter, a real charter to acknowledge our existence, like the Knights of St. Andrew have done in the Southern jurisdiction, and then have been spread to many other jurisdictions." And so that's exactly what we did. And in 2012, the Sovereign Grand Inspector General, the illustrious brother Joe Manning, chartered us as an actual organization within the Scottish Rite, the Academy of Reflection, which is both a society and a school for contemplative practice for Scottish Rite Masons. We have a curriculum that brothers can work through, and we have instructors who qualify as instructors by completing certain required courses in contemplative practice, and demonstrating their ability to be able to facilitate contemplative practices for others. So this was a major step. This was me really going public as someone offering contemplative instruction in Freemasonry beyond my immediate circle of brothers and those that I had connected with online. Well, that was so well received and started growing so quickly that by the year 2016, I felt confident in coming out as the author of that manuscript and adding to it some other things that I had written over the years. That manuscript that had been written originally back in 2000, I had learned a lot since then about Masonry. I had refined some of my ideas and my practices in contemplation. And so I had this actually published by Stone Guild Publishers. Was that the content of that original manuscript refined with some added writings that I had developed over the years. That book made a pretty big splash. It seemed like it was just time for that sort of thing to happen when it came out, and the sales have been strong ever since. I've gotten some really good reviews on it. The readers of the Southern California Research Lodge have voted it the third most important book of the new millennium. And they like to put in parentheses "so far," which makes a lot of sense because there's a whole lot of millennium left. And so the book continues to draw attention, and I get more and more communication from lodges and from individual Masons saying that they're actually using the practices that are included in this book. And a lot of people thanking me for writing a book that was really different from anything that had ever been written before. This is not just a collection of reflections and ideas about Masonry. It's not a collection of interpretations of Masonic symbols. It is a guidebook on how to do contemplative practices as they are relevant to the 3 craft degrees in Masonry, really structured to what each of the major themes of each of those 3 degrees. It's a how-to book for Masonic contemplatives. You can see here the major chapters in the book. Psychology of Freemasonry was my understanding as a counselor, as someone who's educated in psychology, about what is the inherent psychology of Freemasonry. What is its inherent understanding of the human psyche, of how it works, of how to improve it, and what its potentials are. The next chapter after that being a straightforward approach to Masonic esotericism and trying to demystify this word esotericism to help people understand that what esotericism really is a manifestation of the deep human need to make known that which has been unknown, to discover that which is hidden, and especially that which is hidden within ourselves. And then the next 3 chapters in the book are those exercises that I was talking about earlier. Now, this book was written primarily with the view that individual Masons needed to do this kind of work on their own. It's important for us as contemplatives to be dedicated to this as individuals, that we find a way of doing contemplative practice as an individual, and then we keep doing it. That consistency and regularity of practice is important, just like anything that you want to develop well. If you want to be a good musician, you have to practice consistently and regularly. If you want to be a good painter, same thing. Good martial artist, same thing. Whatever it is, if it's an art or a science, you have to practice it. And contemplation is both of those. As a result of writing that book, I was asked to be a contributor to this book, as you heard in the biography that Brother Bizak gave earlier. This is a wonderful book with lots of different perspectives on the significance of initiation, the history of initiation, both inside and outside of Masonry. And I was approached to write a chapter about the connections between initiation and contemplative practice. And that's what I did. In fact, the chapter is called Contemplation and Ritual Initiation. That chapter is broken down by introducing 4 basic kinds of contemplative practice. So mindfulness, which is simply being as aware as you can of what you're doing while you're doing it, being in the present, right here and now, as much as possible. Reflection, which is looking back on what you have done and what you experienced and trying to understand it a little deeper, trying to make connections between that experience and other things in your life. Study is, of course, learning from others. The contemplative practice of reading deeply, not just skimming, but reading deeply what other people have to say and thinking very carefully about the words that they have used and the implications of those words, and then integrating the different things that you read, trying to bring them together in a way that makes sense for you. That's what it means to study. And that's very much a contemplative practice. And dialogue. I don't think most of us naturally think of dialogue as a kind of contemplative practice, that meaningful conversation between 2 or more people in which our objective is to better understand something together and better understand each other. And dialogue doesn't have to be about agreeing with each other. It doesn't have to be about solving a problem. It just means trying to understand more deeply and exploring things as much as possible. And enjoying that, finding the joy in that exploration and that shared journey of exploration. And then that chapter in the book, The Art and Science of Initiation, then moves to the practical part. It's like, if you break this down, then what is the primary tool? In Masonry, we talk a lot about our working tools, the tools of operative Masonry that we use symbolically to represent these processes of virtue and relating to the divine and relating to other human beings in more meaningful ways. Well, the primary tool must be consciousness. Consciousness is the tool that allows us to use all other tools. And so if we're going to be masterful in our use of tools, then we have to be masterful with that tool of consciousness. The primary technique towards developing that mastery is learning how to focus the mind, how to turn ourselves back from distraction, and keep that focus, keep coming back to what it is that we mean to be attending to in the moment. Primary training then is mindfulness meditation. That's a kind of meditation in which I might be sitting still, or I might be walking or something like that. But I continually bring my attention back to, what am I doing right then? What's the experience of doing that? And not allowing my mind to drift off and think about other things or go off on tangents, be distracted by something that has already come and gone. But what am I doing right now? So if I'm sitting with closed eyes, that may be just really paying attention to the process of breathing, being so deeply focused on the experience, the sensory experience of breathing, the physiological experience of breathing, that I don't allow myself to be thinking about other things. And if I find myself doing so, I just bring myself back gently, recognizing that that's just part of the way the human mind wants to work, bringing myself back. Now, you may have noticed the tone of my voice. I was being loving with myself when I talk about getting distracted and bringing my attention back. That's the primary motive. That's what really drives all of this talk about contemplation, is love. That's what drives everything we do in Masonry as well. We say that charity, and by charity, we don't just mean generosity, we mean caritas, which is unconditional love, universal love. That's the thing that we say in our ritual is the highest virtue in Masonry. That's the thing that we all aspire to. It's the thing that drives us, the thing that we're after. After producing that book on Contemplative Masonry and producing the chapter in the book, I was asked to be part of a think tank, thinking about the future of Freemasonry and what it needed most. And that think tank started in 2018. And we met over a number of years to come to a consensus that what Masonry needed was a renewed focus on Masonic education, but with the idea that Masonic education is not complete. It doesn't offer everything it can offer if it doesn't address this contemplative dimension of the human psyche and the human experience. And so together we produced this document called Practicing the Art of Our Mysteries, inspired by the life of John E. Fetzer, who was a past Grand Master of Michigan. He was a great leader in radio back in the 30s, I believe it was, and made a fortune as this leader in technology. And he really wanted to ensure that these deeper spiritual and philosophical things were part of our world, that they remained a part of our world, part of our society, especially here in America, as well as within Freemasonry. And so he created a foundation, the Fetzer Institute, with a fund specifically dedicated to spiritual and philosophical endeavors within Freemasonry. And they are the ones who funded this think tank. They didn't put any constraints on us. They didn't tell us what we could do or couldn't do. They saw the potential that the different individuals had that they brought together to do something significant. And so they just funded it. They just made it possible for us to travel from all over the country, spend several different weekends across a number of years together, focusing on what we might be able to contribute to the fraternity as a whole. Not only did we create this document, but we developed what's called the Masonic Legacy Society. And it's not an organization, it's a society in the sense of a group of individuals with a shared culture. That's what it means for us to be a society. And what we do now is we make this document available on our website, mls2026.com or .org. I think you can find it either way. You can just Google Masonic Legacy Society. So this document is now available for free in several different languages. And in addition to this document, we also provide training for Masons who want to be facilitators of contemplative practices for other Masons. And even use it outside of Masonry. We have trained over 60, maybe even over 70 individuals now in how to facilitate contemplative experiences as part of Masonic education. And some of those brothers have used that same process outside of Masonry in other contexts, with their churches, with their families, with their Boy Scout troops. They found that this is a successful model for helping people get a deeper, more deeply useful understanding of some of the noble kinds of things that we say when we're involved in organizations like Freemasonry, Scouts, or even, civic nonprofit organizations. That book or booklet contains these sections here. It talks about the 4 aspects of being: physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. 3 layers of lodge symbolism. Our rituals actually directly say, if not imply, that the lodge represents each of us as an individual and all of our parts as individuals. It represents itself as an entity, a social entity. And then it also represents the universe as a whole, the creation as a whole. And so anytime we're working with Masonic symbolism, we need to be aware of those 4 aspects of our being and how symbolism is relevant to those. We need to be aware of those 3 layers of lodge symbolism and how we can interpret and understand our symbols within each of those layers. And then this process that I kept talking about earlier, you can see there that it begins with relaxation. It then moves into invocation, because Masonry teaches us we should always invoke the aid of deity, and then moves into meditation on something specific, that focused attention. And then finally, we come out of meditation to begin to ask ourselves questions and share with others about our experience. What did that mean? So this is what I experienced in meditation. Let me kind of chew on that a little bit with you and speculate about that meaning. And it's in that dialogue a lot of times that what we experienced in meditation begins to flower and blossom out and become something truly amazing. All this work with individual Masons led me to want to write a book in response to requests for, but what can we do together? That question, what can we do together? And this is my latest book, The Contemplative Lodge. And I address those big questions about how can Masons as groups, whether it's in a lodge or some other Masonic body or just a group of Masons meeting together, what can they do together to engage this contemplative stuff? And I talk about different ways of working together, and you can see some of those listed here. But I also identified that a really important part of this is contemplative leadership. Engaging leadership in Masonry with a contemplative way of being, but also, if you are a contemplative, learning how to be a leader for others to be contemplative without pushing it on them in a way that says you're inferior as a Mason if you don't do this, but making it clear that this is part of what our ritual talks about. It's there for you if you want to engage it. And if you do, I'm here to help you with that. And so you can see how those three sections within contemplative leadership really cover all of those. And then the appendices, which are the majority of the book, are actually scripts for how people can facilitate different kinds of contemplative experiences within a Masonic context. All right, I want to thank you for listening to all of that. There's some contact information that you can see, ways to get in touch with me and see more about some of the projects that I've been involved in, and connect with them if you want to. But I'll take my screen down now. If you want a screenshot, get it quick. And I think we'll have some time for some discussion now.
Excellent. Let me bring my screen back up. Very good. That was an excellent presentation. And for those brothers who have not explored the esoteric side of Freemasonry, I would assume that you've definitely encouraged them to look into that much further. I would like to open up the floor for any questions. I'm sure there are some questions that some brothers or guests have on their mind that they would like to ask our guests this evening. And while I'm pulling up my chat box, you can ask your questions one of two ways. You can simply type your question in the chat, or you're more than welcome to raise your virtual hand on your screen, and I'll be more than happy to call on you and you can ask your question out loud, which would probably be the preferred method of asking your question if you like. And looks like we do have one from Worship Brother Jeriel. So Worship Brother Jeriel, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and kick us off, please.
Just a second, let me get my screen back. Yeah, thank you very much. I just did a post in the chat about the poll that you were found, Chuck, to be the third best book of the new millennium, and I would have to say that this was really before your latest book came in, and we had done two previous polls, and you were found in the top 10, both of Masonic authors and modern esoteric authors of Masonic writing in other polls that we did, and your book is I think perhaps going to be of the most perpetual value to Freemasonry going forward well into the just begun millennium. What you were searching for, didn't find, tracked down and brought back for the rest of us is this idea of a contemplative approach to Freemasonry. All of the three Blue Lodges that I belong to have meditation, and so does the Research Lodge, and you've been an inspiration. Almost all of the significant players in the Southern California Research Lodge make our annual pilgrimage to the spring reunion there at the Guthrie Scottish Rite. And anybody that's a Scottish Rite Mason who has not gone to Guthrie, Oklahoma, and seen all 29 degrees expertly presented in a inspirational setting, you got to go do it. You're not, your 32 degrees are as superficial without doing that. Not necessarily at Guthrie, but whenever it could be. But that's a place, and it's right in the middle of the continent and everything. But you're still on the surface in a similar way that anybody who takes the 3 craft degrees and feels like they now understand Masonry at a deep level. They have been initiated, but initiation is a start of something, and you're still standing in the doorway. To go through the doorway, the key is just what Brother Charles Dunning is promoting. And I'll put in another plug for the Masonic Legacy Society. I've participated in those seminars on how to do it, and there's a fraternal review issue that was guest edited by them. That's all about them. That's you I think Chuck are leading, and another thing I would like to really put a punctuation point next to is don't just learn how to do this, learn how to lead other brothers to do it. It needs to spread, and if it does, everybody's welcome to still play dominoes and be avuncular to their upcoming kids. But also another thing is you no longer have to be secretive the way Chuck's ancestry was. We have the freedom now to talk about Freemasonry other than that limited set of signs and grips and postures and those kind of things. And we should be doing it, and get Chuck's 2 books. They're manuals for having done it. And Brother Chuck, it is such a delight to see you. I was so disappointed when you weren't there last time, and I will shut up for now. But this man, brothers, is someone to emulate and to admire. Thank you, Brother Chuck.
Thank you for the very kind words, Brother Jeriel. For those of you who haven't met Jeriel, he's a wonderful man, and I consider him a good friend, and I'm always happy to be in his company.
Yep. Thank you, Brother Jeriel. Brother Chuck, I've got one for you. How might a lodge that has no history or no interest in this approach to Freemasonry, how might they be inspired or open their eyes or mind to pursue or to learn more about this path of Freemasonry?
It might sound grossly self-serving to say buy my books, but I mean, in all honesty, I have to make that recommendation because that's why they were written. Sure. Is to help individual Masons and to help lodges as a whole discover, appreciate, and engage in this dimension of Freemasonry. I think it's also important to try to identify individuals that that you may be able to rely on as resources. And so, for example, looking at the Masonic Legacy Society, one of the things you can do is contact them and ask them who they have trained as facilitators near you. Like I said, we have facilitators all across the country, and there's a good chance that that there's someone relatively close to your lodge wherever you are in the country. Now, I'll say that with some caveat. That gap, you know, the heart of the country, let's say north of Texas, west of the Mississippi, and east of the Rockies, is where it's going to be hardest to find someone really close to you. But even there, we have people even in those areas. And so I would say, look for that. as an option, but also try to identify Masons in your region, in your area or your district who already practice meditation. It's not that uncommon anymore. And if you just start saying, if it just becomes known that this is an interest and that you want to connect with more Masons who have a contemplative practice of some sort, they'll show up and they can be a really helpful resource to you as well.
Thank you. Matt Parker, go ahead, sir.
Hey, Chuck, how are you? Long time no see.
Man, it's been forever, brother. Where are you?
Right. A whole what? 48 hours?
Yeah.
Not even that. First I want to say, actually, you just answered the question I was going to ask. But I will say that I firmly believe that contemplative Masonry and Most Worshipful Brother Bob Davis's new book, In Search of Light, should be mandatory reading for every new Master Mason. As soon as they're raised, put it in their hands. Because frankly, contemplative Masonry is what's going to save Masonry. That's the future of Masonry, not the green bean Masonry, as Joe Martinez would say, or not listening to the secretary read the minutes. No offense to any secretaries on here, but you know what you can go do with your minutes. It is going to be returning to those contemplative practices, and it's not an innovation, it's a return to what Masonry was. And so anyway, like I said, my question was already answered, but I didn't want to just throw that out there.
Thank you, Brother Matt. I might say something a little softer there, and that is that that I think contemplative practice is one of the things that the future of Masonry needs. And again, I will just emphasize that it may not be the thing that every Mason focuses on, but I think every Mason needs to know it's available and feel supported if that's what they choose to pursue.
Great. Brother Chuck, there are a couple of questions in the chat box, if you have that available to read.
Okay, I'll take a look.
There's one from Bruce and another one from Brian's iPhone.
Let me go. Oh, I see the one from Bruce. Okay, I'll do that one. Was your journey to get to contemplative Freemasonry obtained by not being satisfied until you kept asking, what is the bottom line of this? I have asked that question or a similar question a lot, Bruce. I think another similar question that I ask a lot is, well, what does this mean? And why are we saying this about our ritual? And not everybody likes to hear those questions. And it amazed me as a young Mason how uncomfortable elder Masons would get with those two questions. What does this mean? And why are we saying this? And I've come to understand that they were uncomfortable because nobody had ever prepared them for those questions. The questions they had only been prepared for were the ones in the catechism, and they were given the answers to those questions. And they were never taught that the questions in the catechism could be answered in more than one way. That the answers that are given in the catechism are the traditional answers, and that even those traditional answers can be interpreted and understood in more than one way. So I think just the process of asking questions about what we're doing and why we're doing it, that is a contemplative practice in itself. And it's something we need to be encouraging Masons to do. But too often, that's set aside. Stop asking questions. Just do what you're told, do what everybody else has done, and keep the ball rolling. That's it, period. That sounds pretty harsh, and it probably has a tone of anger to it. And part of that is because I see how much damage that kind of attitude has had. How many Masons have been lost from our fraternity because of that attitude? How many Masons have had their inspiration, their souls crushed because of that attitude? And it needs to stop. It's got to stop for the benefit of individual Masons and for the benefit of our future as a fraternity. We have got to encourage each other to seek the meaning of what we're doing at all levels. Not just assume that it's about charity, not just assume that it's about making more Masons to pay for great looking buildings and fancy regalia, but that it is about something transformative in our lives and in the lives of our society and in our communities. And if we really get that, if we really embrace that, then contemplative practice is natural. Masonry is designed to be a contemplative practice. Ritual is a contemplative practice if you just pay attention to what you're saying and think about the meaning of it. It's so apparent to me. And I think once you start paying attention to the words in the ritual, you discover that. So that's my response, Bruce. Would you like to ask any other question of that? I welcome you to join us live in the conversation here.
Not so much a question as to say thank you for opening up a whole nother world of Masonry to me. I think I'm going to be buying some more books. Being an ordained minister, it's not part of the training that I received at seminary. I've always been kind of exploring on my own, especially since about 1994, when I got open to a lot of different of the top motivational speakers and started reading a lot of stuff. And the bottom line question came from John Maxwell's Thinking for a Change book, which I've mentioned in previous things. But it is. I think we need to keep asking that question. What's the bottom line? And I get tired of people not taking our craft seriously sometimes. To me, when we're doing a degree in front of a candidate, it says that it's supposed to be with dignity and decorum, and all of a sudden somebody's laughing because they made a mistake or something. And to me, that's not taking it seriously. And I get a little upset, and I guess that's why I'm seeking, to find a place where I feel more comfortable than my current lodge. So, and why I enjoy this gathering of like-minded men.
Yes. I really appreciate that comment because, I was talking earlier about dialogue and that is a contemplative activity. And that's what gatherings like this are about. And this brings value to the Masonic experience. It brings depth and meaning to our experience as Masons. And so thank you for being here and being part of that, Bruce.
Thank you for coming back and doing what you were asked to do last week or last month. So I appreciate that you could still come. So
thank you. I'm really glad it worked out.
Brian, did you want to ask your question out loud?
Sure. So sorry for the delay on getting on tonight, guys. And great presentation, by the way. I'm in Central Time Zone now, so it's a little more difficult to get on at 7 p.m., which is 6 p.m. here. So
Me too,
I apologize.
brother.
Yeah. It's getting off work and dialing in on the card, whether just listen than not participate at all. So to my question, I had asked, let me bring it up here. I'm sorry. I'd asked the question regarding your journey. Essentially, I've had a lot of conversation with a lot of men throughout the state of Kentucky, where I'm from. I'm in Wisconsin now. And they've kind of asked questions that are kind of like at the eyebrow raised by like different Masons who aren't really thinking outside the box. They're more, we've always done it this way type Masons. So my question for you is as you began your journey, kind of developing this, because this is the first I've heard of it, were you kind of given the raised eyebrow, and what was your take on that?
Yeah, it was. I I had a mixed response. I was fortunate enough to be somewhat supported by the worshipful master of my lodge when I became a master mason, the man who was worshipful master when I became a master mason, because it wasn't the same man as when I started as an EA. Both of them, by the way, were supportive, but I was fortunate enough to have that. I didn't hide my interests, and his name was Jerry Westbrook, worshipful Jerry Westbrook, and he was supportive in the sense that he welcomed me to give talks to the lodge and to even start a little discussion group that would meet from time to time, a kind of study group, a little book club essentially. And it kind of went all right for a while, but there was just so much grumbling from other brothers, the majority of other brothers, that it was hard to keep things together, to hold things together. And when he wasn't the master anymore, it all came to an end. And so I thought, well, maybe the Scottish Rite. And I didn't get a much better reception, even though the Scottish Rite overtly talks about the kinds of things that I'm interested in. When I would ask the brothers those questions, why are we saying that? Why do we talk about this? I mean, do we mean any of this stuff? They would get really uncomfortable, not want to have those conversations, tell me to learn my lines and get on with the work. And so I just learned to keep my mouth shut. I still saw enough value in the things that we were doing to stay involved in many of the things that we were doing. So don't get me wrong. It wasn't like I just threw up my hands and said, this is all a sham, I'm walking away from it. I've seen brothers do that, but I didn't. I was convinced that it was worthwhile to stick with it, even if I remained on the fringes as an oddball for the rest of my life. And I was fortunate enough to be able to connect with other brothers who had very similar feelings and were involved in different environments. I'm telling you, man, if I had walked into Masonry 20 years earlier, my story would be significantly different. And on that note, one of the things that I will say has been one of the most meaningful parts of my experience since going public with all of this are the older Masons even older than me, believe it or not, who come up to me, sometimes with tears in their eyes, saying, this is what Masonry has always been for me. Thank you for helping make it possible to say so out loud. That's, in one way, it's heartbreaking. And in another way, it's inspiring that they have had the courage to stay in there, and they found something beautiful enough in Freemasonry to stay with it, even though that part of what they wanted was painfully missing for them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question, Brian. Gerald, I'm going to skip you for one quick second because we got you already, if you don't mind, but I'll come back to you. Lee, go ahead.
Thank you, Brother Evans. Brother Dunning, I'm just curious. Is there any particular age group that you find is predominant in doing contemplative masonry?
Oh, what a great question. I can't say that there is. I find that in general, younger generations are more exposed to the idea of meditation and meditative practices. But when I have gone to lodges and facilitated group meditations or other contemplative activities, or when Masons have come to activities that we provide in the Guthrie Valley through the Academy of Reflection, and they just show up to find out what it's about, I would say that it's probably the older Masons who demonstrate the greatest curiosity, the greatest sense of wonder and discovery and enthusiasm, and because it's new to them. It's a new part of Freemasonry, and a lot of them, they've kind of grown complacent and jaded with the, with what they've always done, and now this is something new to catch their interest, and they also sense the depth of meaning in it for them. And so I would say for different reasons, I find a kind of an equal distribution, more or less, of response to this.
Thank you.
Good question.
That was a good question.
Brother Gerald, go ahead.
Actually, my comments were kind of set up by your question, Brother Lee, and Chuck, your answer. I was going to suggest a couple of strategies that have worked well at my lodge at South Pasadena, and that is to start this process with the guys that come into your lodge looking to possibly become members, and talk to them about this, build that expectation in for them. And then if you can get a class set up where you're doing classes with your candidates as they're going through, reinforce it there. And what my experience has been is that it's the younger Masons who are predisposed to go, yeah, let's do it. But if you can get the older Masons to be in the room when that happens, they are perhaps the most enthusiastic about it, because I've had several guys at my lodge that were older guys, and they had never done meditation before. And even the first time they come out of it, and then we have a sharing around the class group about the impressions that came to us thinking about a Masonic symbol or a Masonic principle. I use all the time that truth underlies all of the four Masonic cardinal virtues, and touch on that today too. But that's for me, I think that's the way to do it. And sooner or later, if the guys that are coming up want to do it, space can be made for them to do it. And eventually us old codgers age out and get out of their way. But you'll also find a number of converts like myself. And my last comment is, Chuck, you said if you had come in 20 years earlier. I came in 22 years earlier in 1966. And while I remained technically a Mason, I didn't really become active until 2012.
Wow.
Because I was seeking that knowledge elsewhere. When I came back and found that track that involves research lodges and observant lodges and that are interested in this sort of stuff, I found that everything that I had learned in all of those other studies are contained in Masonry. And that's why in our magazine, we frequently we connect it with Stoicism and alchemy and all of those kind of things. This is all one universal teaching. And Freemasonry is one of the best structures on which to base it. And get those guys, and it doesn't matter how old they are, it's when they approach a lodge. Get that, don't waste your time just talking with your buddies at your stated meetings, dinners. Find the guys that are coming in looking, and try to be their guide a little bit in this direction, and see if you don't get some results there. That's it.
Thank you, Jeriel.
Thank you, Chuck, and you, Lee.
Brothers, three more people like to call on, and then we'll proceed to try to close out the evening. First, David, I think you had your hand raised, your normal hand. There's a virtual hand thing, which I'm not even sure how to do myself, but if you click it, I'll see it. So why don't you go first, Lee, if you could go second, and then Worship Brother Dan Kimball, if you could go thirdly, please.
Brother Chuck, it's good to see you again. Remember,
Good to see you again, brother.
we were together at the inner chamber or the
Yes.
outer chamber. Yeah, I want to deviate just a little bit. when I was brought to light and I looked around in the lodge and I thought, gee, these guys all look like me.
Mm,
I'm a 50-year Mason. I spent the first 25 years of my Masonic life paying my dues.
mhm.
After I retired, I got active and helped bring together a lodge, I'll call it TO Light, in Columbus, Ohio, called Arts and Sciences.
Mm,
And our altar, we had the holy books from every one of our members. Of course, the Holy Bible, the Quran, Jewish Bible, the I can't tell you what the Hindu was, Shinto, and they were all our members. And we would sit around, go to refreshment, and we'd sit around and we would be contemplative on how long is your cable tow? Or, and to me, that really was what Masonry meant. You know, look tonight what we have here. It's all a bunch of white guys. It
mm,
doesn't reflect our society. And I think we're missing some of that. I realize, you know, most lodges in the country are elected, you know, have now recognized the Prince Hall brothers. But still, we're not there as a society to be contemplative together.
mm.
I'll
Yeah, I
close there.
I think those are worthy comments, brother. You know, Freemasonry has very high ideals. Anderson's Constitution say that we're supposed to be a center of union for people who would otherwise remain at a perpetual distance. And that means we're supposed to be breaking down barriers of division that our cultures and societies create. That's a very high calling, a very, very high calling, and not one that's easy to meet. And definitely, if you're not being contemplative about the meaning of those words and taking to heart the meaning of Freemasonry, the words that we say in our rituals, as well as the Constitution, then being able to actually enact those words and make real the ideals that we espouse is 10 times harder. So thank you for drawing our attention to those ideals of Masonry.
Thank you, Brother David. Brother Lee, you had your hand up. You brought it down. Did you want to add anything else?
I'm sorry, brother. No, I'm just a little slow in getting my hand down. Although I would make the comment now that you did ask me. Brother Dunning said a phrase that really stuck in my mind. The words are there. The engagement isn't. Thank you.
So I'm gonna, Brother Bedford, I'm gonna put you on the spot in just a moment because you came to light as soon as David said we have a bunch of white guys on this screen. So I'm gonna ask you to make a few comments on that, because I agree. It's obvious. It's obviously that there is that in our fraternity. I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are, brother.
Well, thank you, Worshipful Evans. I honestly looked at this particular lesson as like the building blocks and fundamental of all Masonry, as you mentioned. I was fortunate enough to be invited into a couple of lessons with brothers after my initiation, which had these breakout discussions, which is, further instruction, further education. Truly an enjoyable lesson, what we received here today. And hopefully there's more of this that spreads throughout Masonry. We need those, I call it additional attention or the extra care, so that, like, I heard another brother mention that it was like, learn your lines and just kind of go through the motions and, do as others have done before you. But this actually creates the swivel and gives you an opportunity to really understand, what you experience, and then further what you are going to be experiencing as a traveler, as a brother. Absolutely amazing lesson today.
Thank you, Brother Bedford. Appreciate you.
And
joining.
there's some different brothers in here as well.
All right.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you, Brother Patrick.
You know, I would
No
say
problem.
true Mason, it doesn't matter what you look like. What matters is what's in your heart. And I think we all would agree. Every man on this here with us tonight would agree with that, I would say. And Chuck, you said it probably best, that it all comes down to one word, love, right? Which
It does.
spawns from the heart. So that's what Masonry is all about. Worship Brother Dan Kimball, I'm going to give you the final word, brother. Do you have any other questions for our excellent guest speaker tonight?
Worshipful Brother Brian, thank you. Worshipful Brother Chuck, thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us and for such a wonderful presentation. So I do have a question for you, and I'm asking a question for a friend. I'll preface my remarks by that. William O. Ware Lodge of Research, which is a co-sponsor of this event, has a feature where we review a book on Freemasonry every month, and we post that review on our website. In October of 2021, the book that we reviewed was Contemplative Masonry. One of our brothers, Worshipful Keith Gunkel, reviewed your book, and after he read your book and wrote his review, he and I sat down and talked about it a little bit. And there was one particular portion that appears in a couple of different contexts in your book that really stood out to him. And after having some discussions with him, we decided that we wanted to pose this question. So Keith couldn't be with us this evening, so I'm asking this for him. There are several occasions in your book where you talk about, where you are listing the steps of contemplative practices. And one of the things that you say is that when you leave lodge, don't talk to anybody. Just maintain your focus. That's so contra to what we generally do, because when the last gavel drops, we generally pair off and start having conversations. But tell us a little bit about what you see as the need to maintain that aura of silence as we depart.
I think that's a wonderful question. And thank you for asking it, because it gives me the opportunity to clarify what I meant in writing that, but then also address the potential of it meaning more. What I meant when I was writing that was I was particularly addressing mindfulness practices, a structured set of mindfulness practices that you go into the lodge with the specific goal of first practicing mindfulness of your physical experience, and then go back and practice mindfulness of your emotional experience, and then go back and practice mindfulness of the intellectual experience, and so on. And that if you're doing that practice as outlined in that book, then when you're done, immediately go, so that you can have that opportunity to not have a break, to not have a disconnect between your lodge experience and then your reflection on that mindful experience of the lodge. If I were going to write the book again, this is one of the places where I've identified I would make a change, because it wasn't my intention to communicate that that should be a standard practice for every lodge experience. However, if you had a lodge culture in which it was understood that the purpose of lodge meeting was overridingly to be this contemplative environment that was very focused on a deep contemplative experience of the ritual and of the gathering and of whatever education might happen there, then it might be appropriate within a lodge culture of that sort, in which there would be no kind of banter and profane conversation after the lodge. That might be appropriate within that kind of a lodge culture. Here's one of the things that I think you would be giving up, and you might choose to give it up, but I would want it to be a choice. You might give up that warm, fraternal interaction that so many brothers value in a lodge, that opportunity for once a month or once a week or whatever it happens to be in a particular lodge for a particular brother, to really be able to meet another man face to face on the level, speak his heart, talk about what's going on in his life, ask questions, and just be friends with another man without any other agenda. That's a really important experience. It's just as important as any kind of contemplative experience a person can describe. And in fact, that too can be a contemplative experience. If you're having that kind of lighthearted banter with another brother after the meeting or even before the meeting, and you recognize that moment as a meeting of souls, as an experience of joy, of spiritual communion with each other, even if the words don't sound particularly spiritual, but you recognize that's what's going on, that's brotherly love being manifested in the moment. If you know that in the moment, it's a contemplative experience. And so I hope that is what you're looking for there, Dan. And I would welcome you to ask any follow-up question or make any other comment that you have.
I think that's a great explanation. And fortunately, we record these and they are available on YouTube. And I'm sure Worshipful Brother Gunkel will watch this so that he can hear your answer. But that's an excellent response. And I very much appreciate the fact that the perspective that type of interaction can be contemplative in its own right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Dan. And I would be remiss if I didn't give the floor to Worship Brother John Bizak for a moment to offer any questions as well.
Thank you, Brian. I just have a comment. And that is that lamentably, what Chuck and those who support contemplative masonry represent is just how far the fraternity's actually unmoored itself from our philosophical roots. And what's equally lamentable and maybe a shame is that the fraternity today needs to be reminded and needs to even be taught of what we're supposed to be doing in the first place. Now, we drifted generations and generations from our philosophical roots, and it'll probably take generations more to collectively return to that. But thank you, Chuck, for your time tonight, and thank you for a well-presented evening.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me here. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been a beautiful contemplative experience.
Very good. Brother Chuck, any final comments before we proceed to close out the evening?
I would just finish by saying that if this is a sincere interest of yours, I want to encourage you to pursue it. I want you to know that there are resources available to you, that there is support available to you, to follow through with connecting with some of those things that I have shared with you that are available. Find the brothers that share those views and strengthen those bonds. But also remember, in your passion for this part of the Masonic experience, that it's not the only thing that a Mason can be passionate about. And that as a loving brother, as a contemplative brother, my first duty is to be respectful and honor the choices that another brother makes to put his time and his energy into a different aspect of this tradition.
Great. Worship Brother Chuck, thank you so much for coming on tonight and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. We appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brethren and friends, next month we will have the presenter of Worship Brother Pete Norman, past master of the Texas Lodge of Research, and many more attributes to his resume that you will be learning about during his presentation. He will be speaking on the Lodge at Table, a discussion about Masonic dining, which just so happens to dovetail nicely with the upcoming release of our Masonic documentary called The Masonic Table in April. So how that happened, I'm not sure, but we'll take it any way we can get it. So please join us next month as well. It will be a very good discussion indeed. Worship Brother Tom, didn't mean to leave you out, brother. Was there any other updates you would like to provide regarding William Ware Lodge of Research?
Just one thing, Brother Chuck, I want to say an excellent talk tonight. your words really meant a lot tonight in my journey. So I want to say thank you on that end. So I just want to remind anybody who's near Covington, Kentucky on March 30th, we will be having Heather Calloway from the Indiana University Fraternal Collection. She'll be speaking at our meeting at 7:30. So if you're in the area, we would love to have you. Thank you, Worshipful Brother Brian.
Thank you, brother.
Worshipful Brian, I hate to interrupt one more time, but I want to also announce something that you already know, which is the Fraternal Review that will be published tomorrow, is guest edited by Brother Brian and the Rubicon Society, and it is about the Masonic tradition of festive board dining, and it explores that tradition and especially features this very documentary that was just mentioned by brothers John and Brian. So check that out as well. You can see it at our website.
Which is the researchlodge.com, correct?
That is correct.
Great. Thank you for that, brother. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. And thank you guys for the wonderful work that you did on that issue. And if you look at it, you'll see the backstory of the documentary, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the thing in full.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, anyone that does not receive the Fraternal Review, you should subscribe to that. It's very affordable and some excellent education. Brothers, if you're not already aware, we just want to thank you for your support. The Rubicon Masonic Society is now a charitable organization under Section 501c3 of the IRS Code. So if you do have an interest in helping to continue to push our cause forward and spread light in Masonry, doing actions like we have done tonight, we would appreciate your help and assistance and referrals in those matters. So thank you, brothers. Worship Brother Tom, would you please do the honors of delivering the closing devotion?
President, if you'll join me in prayer. Grand Architect of the universe, ruler of heaven and earth, now that we're about to separate and return to our respective places of abode, will thou be pleased so to influence our hearts and minds that we may, each one of us, practice those great moral duties which are inculcated in Freemasonry, and with reverence study and obey the laws which thou hast given us. Amen.
So mote it be. Thank you all for joining us tonight. If you know of any others that might be interested in joining us for future virtual Masonic educations, please ask them to go to rubiconmasonicsociety.com/RSVP. Please keep all sick and distressed in your prayers and always trust in God with all your heart. The closing video tonight will again be the trailer for the upcoming Masonic Table documentary. Brothers, have a great night. Enjoy.
Throughout the world, formal Masonic dining is as commonplace as the square and compass. And it always has been. However, in the US, the practice has fallen away so noticeably that almost every document that has referred to it in the past 100 years laments the fact that it's fallen into a state of disuse. Some lodges may follow very traditional forms of toasts, salutes, and songs, where other lodges may have a more simpler protocol, one that has a more natural and spontaneous feel. Regardless of how a lodge goes about crafting a dining experience, any lodge that does so brings this important component of Masonic fellowship back to life within its walls. And by so doing, more enthusiastically install that noblest of Masonic aspirations into the practice of our craft.